Welcome back. Well, Kim Kardashian and Chris Humphries blew a bundle on their wedding, and it lasted all of 72 days. Well, we all want to speculate on what could have gone wrong, but our next guest may have the answer. And we're thrilled to have Barbara Bartlein back on the show.
That's right. Barbara authored several books on marriage, including this one, Why Did I Marry You Anyway? We talked about that book before. Her latest book is this one here. It's called Marriage Makeover, Simple Ways to Revitalize Your Relationship Without Your Spouse Even Knowing About It. I like that. Good morning. It's so nice to have you.
Good morning.
Yeah, we've been talking about, you know, dresses and the cake and the diamond rings and some of those things, but, and those, not that those things aren't important. That's about planning the big day, but there's some relationship issues that are really important for people to talk about before they put on the dress, right?
Definitely, before you say I do. And too often, people spend all the time planning the wedding without giving much thought to the marriage. And there simply are some issues you have to discuss.
Well, what's number one?
Money.
Is it?
Always money. It's the number one thing couples fight about. They argue about it before and after. But yet, very often people get married, they don't even discuss how much money they have. Who's going to be working?
Right.
Who's going to pay the bills? How are we going to handle finances? I've seen couples come in, they get married and find out after the wedding date that their spouse has a lot of debt. Well, you know what? I would have liked to have known about that before I said I do.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that? Because I would think a lot of people think, obviously it's a sensitive issue for many people. Finances can be very private. You know, how do you bring that up without, I guess, feeling like you're rocking the boat too early, before there's even a rock on your hand?
Yeah.
Well, I urge couples, especially once they're engaged, sit down, make a list of all your assets, all your liabilities. How are you going to handle the money? One checking account, two separate accounts. And it's not necessarily that there's a right or wrong way, but you have to decide on some way.
Right. It doesn't seem real romantic, but
No.
what you're saying is it's important if you want the relationship to last.
Absolutely, absolutely. And not get caught up in what's romantic and not romantic. Nothing is less romantic than to find out nobody paid the mortgage.
Exactly. That's a good point. And spending patterns, you also mentioned in the information we have, is another key thing to talk over with someone is how do you spend money, how do you
Right.
make buying decisions, things like that. Number two on the list?
Sex. I mean, maybe people think this all magically happens, but for many, many couples, in fact, most couples, it doesn't. And most couples have different sexual appetites, so you need to talk that out and work out compromises and expectations. Very important.
Do you think people just assume that it'll be the same as it was while they were dating? Is that the problem?
I think very often people make that kind of assumption, or they think that bells and whistles are just going to happen. And no, it's like anything else. You have to put a little work into it. Couples often say, well, I want it spontaneous like when we first met. There was nothing spontaneous about that. You worked all day getting ready to go out. You spent all day getting your nails and your hair and everything done. So no. You need to talk about it.
Yeah, and to be able to communicate those things that you mentioned is not always easy, but also obviously very important. Number three on your list is kids.
Kids.
So do you want to have kids? Do you not? Because you don't want to say I do and then find out that somebody doesn't want to have children if you've been longing to be a mom or a dad.
Exactly. And sometimes couples will come in and they'll say, well, we just thought it would work out. Well, how was it going to work out? Maybe they got married and one really wanted children and the other one said, well, we'll think about it. Well, I don't know what that means. And then they find out after a few years they'd like to start a family, and like you say, maybe the wife or the husband doesn't want to. And those are not minor decisions. It changes your whole life.
Yeah, it
so
does.
It's not like getting a puppy.
No, that's not a small compromise
Right.
on one end either. I've seen people who date for years on end and then realize, oh, we never talked about this, and so they break up before there ever could be a marriage because they realize we don't even want the same things in life.
Exactly.
A lot of people are marrying later in life too, and I wonder if it's also important to talk about what if you both want kids but you're maybe unable to. How do you feel about infertility treatments, or how do you feel about if we're a couple who can't have kids?
That would they both be open to adoption? And how important is it to their life dreams? You know, some people it isn't as important. Other people that's really, really an issue for them.
How about religion? Is that something that plays in, that's on your list here? I'm surprised to see it so high up because, again, I would assume that people talk about it or go to church or don't go to church or, you know, whatever their religion is.
Well, and this somewhat fits together to the whole issue of kids. Because maybe while they're dating, they weren't going to church and it wasn't as big a deal. But for many people, once they have children, they want to be back involved in a church. Now, what are the expectations? What if you come from two different religious frameworks? What if one of the people is more of an atheist or an agnostic? You can get into a lot of conflict.
What about each other's families?
Oh, can be a big issue. Big issue. That's why I like that you recommended buying a ring for the mother-in-law. I think that's very, very good. It helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, what will be the dynamics with the family? Is the expectation, for example, on Christmas that every Christmas is spent with the wife's family? Or how are you going to handle those things? Do you even like each other's families? And what are the proper boundaries for the family? All those things need to be talked about.
And if you don't get along and you don't like each other's families, or maybe one or the other, that's probably important to talk through and decide how you're going to handle it.
Right, and be in sync so that doesn't become a source of conflict.
We're almost out of time, but I just want to touch on careers and having that sort of conversation about those life goals and dreams and work values.
Absolutely, and energy styles connected to that. You know, is one person a workaholic while the other one likes to lay on the couch? You're going to have conflict. Do you both want high-powered careers? If so, how are you going to manage the other things in your life? All those kinds of things need to be talked about.
And I think it's important, your last one is where you're going to live, and with you having a boyfriend who lives in New York and she now lives in Milwaukee, that's another important thing to work out before you get married, which is a great point.
Same with the Kardashians. That's why it didn't work for them.
Even if you spend a lot on the wedding, it doesn't mean it's going to last.
She just didn't want to move to Minnesota. Who could blame her?
So here's Barbara's book again. It's called Marriage Makeover, Simple Ways to Revitalize Your Relationship Without Your Spouse Even Knowing, which is great. And her website, barbarabartlein.com. It's great to have you back.
Thanks to be here, Barbara.
My pleasure.
Thanks. Come back again soon. We like having you here.
Will
It's
do.
fun. Okay.